The hitchhiker. I began my career as a truck driver at the start of summer, when the sun still shone on the endless roads of Route 66, that mythical American highway that had always fascinated me. My inaugural trip started in Chicago, headed for Los Angeles, a journey of several hours that would pass through vast fields and small towns forgotten by time. It was the job of my dreams. Freedom, adventure, and a good country rock playlist keeping me company as I crossed the American Midwest. I felt at home inside the truck's cabin, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Everything seemed normal until it all changed halfway through, when night fell and the real journey began. After driving for hours, I stopped at a small gas station in a forgotten village in Kansas. The sun was setting, and the convenience store seemed like a good place to stretch my legs and get some coffee. However, as soon as I walked in, I noticed something odd. There was an unsettling silence, as if the entire world was suspended in time. The attendant, an elderly man with tired eyes, looked at me strangely, almost as if he knew something I didn't. I grabbed my coffee and quickly left, uncomfortable with the way he kept watching me until I was out of the store. Back on the road, as twilight descended, I began to feel an eerie presence, a chill down my spine I couldn't ignore. The truck's radio started to crackle, interrupting my music with a haunting static that made my nerves stand on edge. I looked in the side mirrors but saw nothing but darkness, interspersed with the distant lights of highway poles. The sound came back, but now it seemed like whispers amidst the static, as if someone was trying to speak to me. I tried tuning into another station, but the interference continued, and a dark premonition settled over me. That's when I saw the figure standing by the roadside. At first I thought it was an illusion created by my tired eyes, but as I got closer, I saw it was a man hitchhiking. He seemed harmless, a common traveler, maybe someone with a broken-down car, I thought. The rain started to fall, gently dripping on the windshield. Against my better judgment, I slowed down and offered the stranger a ride. He got in quickly, thanking me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something about him made me uneasy, but before I could change my mind, we were on our way again, immersed in the dark night. As we drove, I tried to make conversation with the man, hoping to ease the growing tension. His name was Tom, and he claimed to be heading home after visiting a sick relative. However, his answers were evasive, and he kept glancing out into the darkness. My discomfort grew when he started asking personal questions about me and my route, his tone casual but with hidden intentions. I began to realize that he knew details I hadn't mentioned, like my final destination in Los Angeles. My instinct told me something was very wrong. As the rain intensified, a shrill scream erupted from the radio, causing the man beside me to flinch. It was a red flag for me. Without thinking twice, I made an excuse about needing to check a load in the trailer and pulled over. Once I stopped, I asked him to help me check the back, trying to keep my voice steady. As soon as he got out, I quickly locked the door and sped off, leaving him alone on the road. My heart raced uncontrollably, and I knew I had done the right thing, even though I didn't fully understand the danger I had just avoided. With the rain pounding the truck and the road stretching endlessly ahead, I called the police, explaining the frightening encounter. They listened attentively and assured me they would patrol the area, but they couldn't hide a certain indifference. Maybe they were used to calls from scared truck drivers in the middle of the night. However, the voice on the other end became more serious when I mentioned the name Tom. There was a tone of recognition and urgency that made me realize I was right to trust my instincts. Something very wrong was happening that night. Still shaken, I drove to the next gas station, a small stop illuminated in the middle of nowhere, hoping to see a police car or a sign of safety. There, I went into a 24-hour diner and ordered a coffee, trying to calm my nerves. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a kind look, noticed my state and asked if I was okay. Reluctantly, I shared what had happened, and she listened attentively, nodding from time to time. In the end, she simply murmured, "You were lucky to get away. Tom has scared a lot of people around here." My suspicions were confirmed, and a shiver ran down my spine. I returned to the truck with a renewed determination, though the sense of danger still lingered. The hot coffee in my hand felt like the only anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I reviewed the route on the GPS, ensuring I would take a more traveled path, avoiding secondary roads until Los Angeles. As I accelerated again, relief began to wash over me, mixed with growing curiosity about the real danger I had faced. The city lights were getting closer, and I focused on reaching my destination, longing for the end of this unforgettable trip. At one point during the journey, I noticed a car following my truck at a constant distance, its headlights like watchful eyes in the darkness. I tried to ignore it, but the car persisted, and fear began to creep back into my mind. I picked up my phone, ready to call the police again, when the car sped up, passing me before disappearing into the night. The relief was brief, but it strengthened my resolve to complete the trip without further interruptions. That night, I promised myself never to pick up unknown hitchhikers again. Finally, as I crossed the California border, I saw the lights of Los Angeles shimmering in the distance like stars. A feeling of triumph mixed with exhaustion took over me. However, upon reaching my destination and unloading the cargo, I found a note stuck to the truck door. Written in hurried letters was a message that sent chills down my spine. "Until next trip, partner." I looked around, but there was no sign of Tom or any other familiar face. I knew the journey had ended, but the threat remained, hanging in the air like an invisible shadow. Reflecting on that night, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. The world of truck drivers wasn't as simple as I had imagined. There were real dangers, unpredictable people, and situations that tested my courage and judgment. As I headed home, I decided to share my story with other truck drivers, warning them about the risks of lonely roads and suspicious hitchhikers. The lingering fear in my mind reminded me that safety should always come first. I would never forget that night, and although I was relieved to have escaped, I knew the road always held its secrets. The Road of Fear. It was a tranquil autumn night in Minneapolis, and I was beginning my long haul along Interstate 94, heading west. The sky was clear, but a light mist was starting to form on the rural roads I was about to travel. The radio was tuned to my favorite station, and I was excited for a relatively easy night of driving, like so many others I had done before. The routine was familiar, and thus the feeling of comfort enveloped me. I had no idea that this night would be different from all the others. As the early morning hours progressed, the city lights gave way to near total darkness. Traffic was sparse, and the road seemed endless. That's when I began to notice something strange. A car ahead appeared to be stopped in the middle of the road, with no apparent reason for it. The vehicle had its lights off and seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. An uneasy feeling began to settle in, but I continued on, thinking it might be a mechanical failure or something similar. As I got closer, the car started to move slowly, as if it were following me. I stayed alert, my senses on edge, but decided not to speed up, maintaining a steady pace. When the car finally caught up to my cab, a pale face appeared in the passenger window, staring intently at me. The gaze was penetrating and cold, and for a moment, the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. The car then began to accelerate and vanished into the darkness, leaving me with a chill. After a few minutes of tension, I decided to stop at a secluded gas station to regroup and check the truck. The station was poorly lit and appeared to be closed, but there was a small lit area where I could refuel. The place seemed deserted, except for a tired-looking attendant who was sitting at a table, working the night shift. I felt a momentary sense of relief, but the discomfort from the strange experience still hung over me. As I refueled, I began to notice that the attendant didn't seem very interested in interacting. He was engrossed in a book with a nearly dazed expression, yet something still felt off. I had the sense that I was being watched. I looked around and realized that the station was quieter than usual. The sound of the refueling seemed amplified, and every noise felt weighted with extra unease. Suddenly, a faint metallic noise caught my attention. I looked toward the station's store and saw a shadow moving quickly behind the window. The attendant, who had disappeared for a moment, returned to the counter with a disturbed look. He seemed agitated, and I couldn't pinpoint why. A growing sense that something was wrong enveloped me, and I decided it was best to leave quickly. As I got back into the truck, the same car that had been following me earlier reappeared, now closer to the station. It seemed to be following me again. My heart raced, and I pressed the accelerator trying to escape the area. The car behind me didn't slow down, and the sense of being pursued was palpable. The gas station quickly disappeared in my rearview mirror, and I found myself again on a deserted road, with the pursuing car still tailing me closely. Trying to lose the follower, I decided to take a poorly lit secondary road that seemed longer, but perhaps safer. The car behind me continued to follow, and the feeling of being hunted increased with every minute. The secondary road was narrow and winding, and the sense of isolation intensified with the lack of lighting and the dense vegetation surrounding the road. As the pursuing car stayed close behind, the secondary road became even more uneven. The turns were sharp and the terrain increasingly rugged. I knew I needed to find a safe place to stop and confront the pursuer if necessary. In a moment of desperation, I found a small clearing by the road and decided to stop, hoping the pursuer would also slow down. When the pursuing car finally stopped behind my truck, I got out of the cab with a mix of fear and determination. The night was silent except for the distant sound of crickets. The unknown car was now parked at a safe distance. A disheveled-looking man with an unsettling gaze emerged from the vehicle, slowly advancing towards me. I braced myself for a confrontation, with my heart pounding and my mind racing. As he approached, the man revealed that he was trying to help. He explained that he had seen a group of suspicious people in a campsite on the secondary road and was concerned they might be setting up an ambush for me. Panic and confusion mixed together, but the idea of a real threat made me reconsider. The man seemed genuine, and after a moment of hesitation, I accepted his help to get out of the area. With the man's assistance, I managed to leave the secondary road and return to the main route, though the feeling of relief was mingled with the unease of knowing that something more sinister might have been happening. The experience left me with a lingering sense of paranoia, and I never looked at a deserted road the same way again. The certainty that invisible dangers lurk around every bend in the road made me deeply reflect on what might truly be waiting in the darkness. The Road of Unease. I'm Tom, a trucker for 15 years, and I've always prided myself on having driven across the country, from Seattle to Miami, facing every condition the road can throw at me. But on that winter night, while hauling a load into upstate New York, the feeling of comfort and familiarity gave way to growing discomfort. The weather was especially cold, and a fog was beginning to blanket the rural road I was traveling. Everything seemed normal until the truck's radio started picking up a strange frequency, a hissing noise unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was one of those nights where the road seems to stretch endlessly, with no end in sight. I was driving along US Route 20, a secondary road cutting through upstate New York, where the surrounding vegetation looked almost alien, covered by a thick layer of ice. The only sounds breaking the silence were the constant rumble of the engine and the occasional crack of the tires on the asphalt. The truck's control panels were bathed in a faint green light, and I had the unsettling feeling of being watched, despite no other vehicles in sight. As the night wore on, a strange sense of unease settled in. That's when I noticed something peculiar, a car following at a safe distance behind me, maintaining the same speed. It was a dark SUV that seemed to have no plates. Every time I accelerated slightly, the car did the same, as if it were tailing me. This wasn't typical behavior for a driver on such an isolated stretch of road. Trying to divert the situation, my radio began to falter, and the truck's GPS signal was lost completely. This only added to my anxiety, as without a signal, I was completely disoriented on that deserted road. The car behind me continued its pursuit, and the feeling of being in a horror movie intensified. With nowhere else to go, I decided to stop at the next gas station, hoping it would offer relief. But my mind was growing increasingly restless. When I finally spotted an old, poorly lit gas station, I decided to stop and check for any issues. Upon entering, I found an attendant with a worried look, but it seemed there was no one else around. While I was at the counter, the attendant casually mentioned that some truckers had spoken about a strange car on the road. My suspicions were confirmed when I noticed the dark SUV parked outside, its lights off, and no one in sight. Determined not to spend the night there, I decided to take an alternate route to get off the rural road and reach my delivery as quickly as possible. The attendant seemed relieved that I was making this choice and provided me with a map of a different route, taking a busier road. When I returned to the truck, the dark SUV was still there, but now appeared to be at an even greater distance, as if watching me from afar. With the new route in mind, I took the alternate road and soon realized that the situation was far from improving. The secondary road was in poor condition, and suddenly my truck began making strange noises. The engine started sputtering, and without warning, the truck came to a complete stop. It was too late to turn back, and I found myself forced to get out and try to fix the problem as snow began to fall. While I worked on the truck, I spotted a faint light in the distance. It was a car approaching, but to my surprise, it wasn't the dark SUV. It was an ordinary car with a visibly nervous man at the wheel. He approached and offered help, but something about his behavior seemed too strange to trust. I decided to continue fixing the truck, keeping a watchful eye on the car and the road. When I finally managed to restart the truck, the car's light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. I was relieved, but the feeling of unease didn't diminish. As I drove down the deserted road again, a shadow appeared in the corner of my side mirror. It was the dark SUV, seeming to have resumed its pursuit, even closer this time. The tension mounted, and I knew I needed to find a quick solution to get out of this situation. I eventually reached a small town and decided to stop at a motel to rest and try to gather my strength. The motel seemed empty, and the owner was more than willing to offer me a room. However, in the middle of the night, I heard a strange noise coming from the parking lot. When I looked out the window, I saw the dark SUV parked outside, with the driver still in the driver's seat, staring directly at my room. Feeling an escalating sense of danger, I decided to take action. I left the motel, trying to stay calm, and went to check on my truck to ensure everything was in order. The dark SUV was still there, but now it seemed to be empty. When I got into the truck and started the engine, I noticed a small note stuck to the windshield with a disturbing message. "You should never have left the road." Feeling an escalating sense of danger, I decided to take action. I left the motel trying to stay calm, and went to check on my truck to ensure everything was in order. The dark SUV was still there, but now it seemed to be empty. When I got into the truck and started the engine, I noticed a small note stuck to the windshield with a disturbing message. "You should never have left the road." Back on the road, my heart was racing and my mind was on high alert. The next day, when I reported the incident to the local police, I found out that it wasn't the first time a trucker had experienced something similar in that area. It seemed that the dark SUV was part of a series of trucker chases, possibly linked to a network of crimes. What happened that night was never fully resolved, and whenever I find myself driving alone, I can't help but feel like I'm being followed, as a constant reminder of what could have happened if I hadn't fled.